If you've ever looked up your human design chart, you may have noticed all those shapes on it and wondered what they are. So those shapes are your centers, and unless you're the reflector type in human design, you have at least 2 centers colored in. The colored in centers are called our defined centers, and in today's video, I'm going to tell you how your defined centers show you where you're here to have power and impact in the world. So if you're a generator, a manifesting generator, a projector, or a manifester, this video applies to you. But before I get into the 5 things that your defined centers reveal, I want to welcome you to my channel on human design. My name is Anna and I'm a projector, and for many years now I have been giving human design readings to help people understand how to use their energy more efficiently to have more success in all areas of life. And speaking of energy, you can think of your defined centers as hubs of energy, and each hub is associated with a different area of life. For example, one center, one hub of energy is associated with your emotions, another has to do with your intuition, another has to do with your communication. Regardless of your type in human design, you have 9 centers on your chart. And again, those colored in centers are called our defined centers. And if you have any white centers, those are your open or undefined centers. All right, let's get into it. Number 1, your defined centers reveal where your energy is consistent and reliable in a certain area of life. For example, if you have a defined sacral center, you have consistent energy to work. You have a lot of physical energy, a lot of capacity that is meant to be used up every day, ideally in satisfying ways. So with the defined sacral center, this makes you a reliable worker because of your capacity and your ability to go until you use up all that sacral energy each day. For example, if you have a defined ego center, that's called the heart center in traditional human design. With the defined ego center, you have consistent willpower and motivation. So you might be somebody who doesn't find it very difficult to get up every day and meditate or stick to a workout regimen or to a diet because you have consistent will and motivation. Number 2, your defined centers show you where you're here to impact others with your energy. So our defined centers are where we project out energy, where we transmit energy, where our energy can be strongly felt by others. For example, if you have a defined solar plexus center, you are here to impact others with your emotions, or your emotions are impactful and can be felt by others. So this might be really helpful if you're a performer, for example. But we also want to be responsible for our energy where we have our defined centers. So let's say you're super emotional. You want to be aware that your emotions are really impacting those around you, especially those who have an open solar plexus center, because wherever we have an open center, we are a receiver of the energy. Defined centers are where we're transmitters of the energy. Let's do another example for this. So if you have a defined root center, you are projecting out stress. This doesn't mean you're more stressed than anybody else, but when you are stressed, know that your stress is impacting those around you. So it's recommended for people with a defined root center to, when they're feeling stressed, to work out, to literally sweat out their stress. Number 3, your defined centers are what make you unique and recognizable to others. Wherever we have definition in our chart, that's what makes us us versus somebody else. So our definition is where things are colored in, like the centers, the gates, and the channels, which are the little lines on your chart. So if I'm looking at somebody's chart, it's going to be very uniquely them based on the constellation of all the colored in parts. And I've never seen 2 charts that look the same. But let's just stick with the defined centers right now. So let's say you have a defined throat center. You probably have a voice that is recognizable and distinctive. For some reason, I think of the actor Chris Evans. He has a defined throat center because he's a manifestor, and all manifestors have a defined throat. So no matter what movie I see him in, I always am, when I hear his voice, I'm like, oh, that's Chris Evans, no matter what role he's playing. Another example would be Martin Luther King Jr., who's top of mind because I just made a little short about him. He was a manifesting generator, and manifesting generators also have defined throat centers, all of them. So if you were to hear a Martin Luther King Jr. speech, but weren't told it was him, probably within 3 seconds of hearing his voice, you would be able to recognize that as Martin Luther King Jr. because he has such a distinguishable and distinguished voice. Let's do another example. So let's say you have a defined G center that's also called the identity center. You are somebody who has a strong sense of self. And you're probably somebody who stands out as an individual and who other people might be influenced by in terms of like, oh, how are they doing that thing, or what are they wearing? And speaking of influence, that brings me to point number 4. Your defined centers are where you influence others. Now, I know we all want to have impact, we all want to have influence these days, but you're really not meant to influence from the places that are open in your chart, just from your definition. So for example, if you have a defined Ajna center, that's going to be your mind, you're really here to influence others with your thoughts, your opinions, your ideas. And most people actually don't have a defined mind. So most people aren't really here to influence with their ideas and opinions. Another example of influence is, let's go back to the solar plexus center. If you have that defined, you might be able to influence somebody else's decisions with your excitement, like, oh, you should do that, right? And if they have an open solar plexus center, they might be more susceptible to your excitement, and that could really influence their decision. So it's about being aware of your definition because of its influence. I know that I have a defined ego center, and I learned very early on that I could get my way because I had such a strong will and I was such a strong, willful child. So again, you do want to be aware of how you use your energy with the power that you have in these centers. Lastly, point number 5, your defined centers reveal where your energy is fixed and sometimes rigid. So circling back to point number 1, your centers are these reliable, consistent hubs of energy, and often the energy operates the same way in that area of life. So for example, with the Ajna center, with a defined mind, you probably apply the same mental process to everything. And if I were to look at your chart, I could actually tell you what that mental pattern is. Same goes for a defined solar plexus center. You are consistently emotional, whether you're up or down, you're always on an emotional wave. And these emotional waves actually have a certain pattern, which again, if I was to look at your chart, I could tell you what that pattern was. If you have, for example, a defined spleen center, we haven't talked about that yet, you have reliable, consistent intuition, and that intuition probably comes to you in the same way. However, where we have these fixed patterns, these fixed way of operating, we can also be rigid because we're not really designed to be super flexible in these areas. So for example, with the defined Ajna center, with a defined mind, you might be more rigid in your opinions and less flexible in your thinking because you're not really designed to be open-minded. Or with a defined ego center, because that center also has to do with our self-esteem, if you have a reliable self-esteem, that could sometimes veer into arrogance. In closing, I just want to add another little point. Because our centers, our defined centers, are where we project out energy, we're not as impacted and influenced in those areas of life by the world or by other people. For example, with my defined solar plexus center, if I am sitting with a client and they're super emotional and crying the whole session, which sometimes happens, it doesn't actually energetically impact me that much because I have a defined solar plexus center. So yes, your defined centers are easier because you are less sensitive to the world around you, and these are places of your power. But there is so much gold in the open centers. So do check out my video, 7 powerful things that your open centers tell you. And until next time, take such good care of your energy and of each other. Bye.